The first man who marries this woman will receive $25 billion. No, she doesn't know. Her family doesn't know. The man who will eventually marry her doesn't know either. But this isn't a story about becoming rich. It's a story that broke my heart. So if you're only here to watch someone become a billionaire, this may not be the story you're looking for. But if you're ready for a story that might stay with you long after it ends, then let's begin. My name is Patience. Welcome to a Tanologue. The day Eliana lost her father, she lost the only person who had ever truly loved her. The funeral was filled with important people. Business partners, politicians, friends, family members she had not seen in years. Everyone wore black. Everyone cried. Everyone spoke about the great man he had been. He was a generous man. He built thousands of jobs. He changed many lives. He was one of the greatest businessmen this country has ever seen. One after another, they stood before the microphone and praised him. Eliana sat quietly in the front row. She did not cry anymore. She had cried so much over the past few days that no tears were left. She simply stared at the large photograph of her father beside the coffin. Even in the picture, he was smiling. It was the same smile he always gave her whenever she returned home from school. She remembered how he used to ask, "How was your day, princess?" That was what he always called her. Princess. Not because she lived in luxury, but because she was the only child he had ever had. Her mother had died while giving birth to her. So from the day she opened her eyes, it had only been the two of them. Her father became both parents. He attended school meetings. He cooked whenever the chef was unavailable. He celebrated every birthday with her. He never missed a graduation ceremony. When she failed at something, he never shouted. Instead, he would smile and say, "Try again. I believe in you." That sentence had carried her through her entire life. She studied hard because she wanted him to be proud. She graduated with excellent results because she wanted him to smile. She learned everything she could about business because one day, she hoped to continue the company he had spent decades building. Not because she wanted money, but because it was his life's work, and she loved him enough to protect it. Now he was gone. A fatal accident had taken him away before either of them had the chance to say goodbye. As people continued giving speeches, Eliana lowered her head. "Dad," she whispered, "what am I supposed to do without you?" No one heard her. A few hours later, the burial ended. People slowly began leaving. Some hugged her. Some promised to check on her. Some told her to stay strong. She thanked all of them with a weak smile. By evening, the large family mansion felt strangely empty. For the first time in her life, there was no one waiting for her. No footsteps. No voice calling her princess. Only silence. She walked into her father's study. Everything was exactly the way he had left it. His reading glasses rested on the desk. His favorite pen lay beside several unopened files. A family photograph stood near the lamp. She picked it up carefully. It was taken years ago. She was still a teenager then. Her father had one arm around her shoulders. Both of them were laughing. She hugged the picture tightly against her chest. This time, the tears finally returned. She cried until she could barely breathe. Outside the study, someone knocked gently. "Miss Eliana." She quickly wiped her eyes. "Come in." The door opened. A familiar face stepped inside. It was Joe. He had worked as one of the security guards at her father's mansion for years. He had watched Eliana grow from a teenager into the woman she had become. He wasn't someone who talked much. He mostly greeted everyone respectfully and quietly did his job. "I'm sorry for disturbing you," he said softly. She forced a smile. "It's okay. I just wanted to ask if you've eaten today." She looked away. "I don't think I can." Joe nodded. "I understand." There was an awkward silence. Then he spoke again. "Your father was a good man." Eliana closed her eyes. "I know. He changed my life." She looked at him. Joe smiled sadly. "I had nothing before I met him. He gave me this job. He treated me with respect. I'll never forget that." Eliana managed a small smile. "He always believed everyone deserved kindness." Joe nodded. "That's true." Another silence followed. "I'll leave you to rest," Joe said. As he reached the door, Eliana suddenly spoke. "Joe!" He turned. "Thank you for coming." He smiled. "I'll always be grateful to your father." He quietly left the room. Eliana looked back at the photograph in her hands. If only she had known that night would be the last peaceful night she would ever spend in that house. The following morning, Eliana woke up with swollen eyes. For a few seconds, she forgot what had happened. Then she looked toward the empty side of the room. No one was there. Reality returned. Her father was gone. She sat quietly on the edge of her bed before taking a deep breath. Dad always hated seeing me stay in bed because of sadness. She whispered those words to herself. I have to be strong. After taking a shower and getting dressed, she walked downstairs. The once lively dining room was almost empty. Only a few houseworkers remained. Most of them avoided looking directly at her. Not because they disliked her, because they didn't know what to say. One of the maids served her breakfast. She barely touched it. A few minutes later, one of the workers entered. Miss Eliana. Yes. They're all waiting in the conference room. She already knew who they were. Her uncles, her aunts, their children, the family lawyer. She stood up slowly. Thank you. As she walked toward the conference room, her heartbeat became louder. She wasn't nervous. She was simply exhausted. The large room was already full. Everyone looked serious. Some avoided eye contact. Others gave her a small smile. The family lawyer stood up immediately she entered. Please have a seat. She sat quietly. The lawyer adjusted his glasses before opening a thick brown file. As everyone here knows, our late brother prepared his will several years before his passing. The room became completely silent. The lawyer continued reading. One by one, properties were mentioned. A mansion, another mansion, farmlands, investments, company shares, luxury cars. Every item already had the name of the family member who would inherit it. This property goes to. This investment belongs to. This house shall be inherited by. Eliana listened carefully. She wasn't counting houses. She wasn't thinking about cars. She wasn't even thinking about money. There was only one thing on her mind. The company. The company her father had spent almost his entire life building. The company she had spent years preparing herself to manage beside him. She remembered staying late in his office after university lectures, learning, asking questions, taking notes. Sometimes he would laugh and say, "You're asking questions like you've already become the boss." She would laugh back. "One day I'll have to replace you." He would smile proudly. "And you'll do better than me." That memory still felt so real. The lawyer finally reached the part everyone had been waiting for. Our late brother's company. The room became even quieter. Shall be inherited by his younger brother. Eliana blinked. She wasn't sure she had heard correctly. The lawyer continued reading. Along with all executive authority and ownership rights. Silence. Complete silence. Eliana stared at him. "I'm sorry." She spoke softly. "I think I heard that wrongly." The lawyer looked at her with sympathy. "You heard correctly." She shook her head. "No. There must be another page. There has to be." The lawyer slowly turned every page. "There isn't." Her breathing became heavier. "What about me?" Nobody answered immediately. "What did my father leave for me?" The lawyer lowered his eyes. "I'm sorry. According to the will, there is no property directly assigned to you." The room suddenly felt smaller. Her ears rang. She couldn't hear anything else. No property. Nothing. Not even the company. Her uncle cleared his throat. "Eliana." She looked at him. "I know this is difficult." She stood up. "Difficult." Her voice trembled. "I spent years preparing for that company. My father trained me. He taught me everything. He wanted me beside him." Her uncle sighed. This was his decision. "No." She shook her head repeatedly. "No. My father wouldn't do this. He wouldn't. He couldn't." Nobody spoke. The lawyer quietly closed the file. "I'm only carrying out his instructions." Eliana looked around the room. Every familiar face suddenly felt distant. She wanted someone, anyone, to tell her this was a mistake. Nobody did. Without another word, she walked out. She didn't even realize she was crying until one of the maids tried to stop her. "Miss Eliana." She gently pulled her hand away. "I just want to be alone." She returned to her room and locked the door. 4 hours, she sat on the floor with her father's photograph. "Dad!" Her voice broke. "Did I disappoint you? Was I not good enough? I tried. I really tried. I studied. I worked hard. I listened to everything you taught me. So why? Why wasn't I enough? She cried until she had no strength left. Downstairs, the family slowly began leaving. Some genuinely felt sorry for her. Others simply got into their expensive cars and drove away. Life was already moving on. But Eliana's world had stopped. She had lost her father. Now she believed she had lost the last piece of him too. The company that had once connected them no longer belonged to her. The next morning, someone knocked on Eliana's bedroom door. She didn't answer. Another knock followed. "Miss Eliana!" Still no response. After several seconds, the door slowly opened. It was one of the maids. She looked around the room. Eliana was sitting beside the window, staring outside. She had not changed her clothes. She had barely slept. The maid walked closer. "Miss Eliana, your uncle is asking for you." Eliana slowly turned. "What does he want?" "He said everyone has to leave the house today." She frowned. "Leave? The house has already been sold." For a moment, she thought she had heard wrongly. "What?" "The documents were completed this morning. The new owners are coming this afternoon." She stood up immediately. "What do you mean the house has been sold?" The maid lowered her head. "I don't know anything else." Without wasting another second, Eliana hurried downstairs. She found her uncle standing near the entrance while several workers carried furniture outside. "What is happening?" she asked. Her uncle sighed. "The house has been sold. So soon. It already belongs to someone else. My room is upstairs. My father's office. My memories." Her voice shook. "You couldn't even wait." Her uncle looked uncomfortable. The decision has already been made. She looked around desperately. Workers were removing paintings from the walls. Boxes covered the expensive furniture. Everything that had once felt like home was disappearing. "My father built this house. I know. He died only a few days ago. I know. So why are you doing this?" Her uncle remained silent. For the first time in her life, Eliana realized something. Nobody was coming to save her. Not anymore. She quietly walked upstairs. She didn't pack clothes first. She didn't pack shoes. She walked straight into her father's study. The room was almost empty now. She picked up the framed family photograph from his desk. Then she took his reading glasses, his favorite pen, and the old notebook where he used to write ideas. Nothing expensive, just memories. She placed them carefully inside a small bag. When she returned downstairs, her uncle handed her an envelope. "There is some money inside." She looked at it, then back at him. "I don't want it." She placed it back into his hand. "If my father wanted me to have it, he would have given it to me himself." She walked past him without another word. Outside the gate, she stopped. For years, every time she left this mansion, she always knew she would return. Today, she wasn't sure she would ever see it again. A familiar voice called from behind. "Miss Eliana." She turned. It was Joe. He had just finished speaking with another security guard. He noticed a small bag in her hand. Then he looked toward the moving trucks. His face slowly changed. "They're making you leave." She forced a smile. "I don't have a choice." Joe remained quiet for a few seconds. "Where will you go?" She looked down. "I don't know." Those 3 words broke something inside him. A woman who had once lived in one of the biggest mansions in the city had nowhere to sleep. He looked at the bag she was carrying. "Is that all?" She nodded. "Everything else belongs to someone else now." Joe took a deep breath. Then he spoke. "You can stay with me." Eliana looked at him in surprise. "What?" "I have a small apartment. It isn't much, but at least you'll have somewhere to sleep." She immediately shook her head. "No, I can't do that." "Why?" "I'll become your burden." Joe smiled faintly. "I don't have much, but I have enough to share." She remained silent. "I can't ask you to do that." "You're not asking. I'm offering." Tears gathered in her eyes again. Since her father's death, people had offered sympathy. They had offered prayers. They had offered kind words. But this was the first person who had offered her a home. Joe picked up her bag. "Come." She looked at him. "I'll return it if you say no." For the first time in many days, a tiny smile appeared on Eliana's face. It was weak. It was tired, but it was real. Without saying another word, she followed him. She didn't know it yet, but that small rented apartment would become the place where she would experience the happiest days of her life and the most painful ones. Joe's apartment was nothing like the mansion she had just left. It had only one bedroom, a tiny sitting room, a small kitchen. The walls were old. The ceiling fan made a strange noise whenever it turned. The entire apartment was probably smaller than her father's office. Joe noticed her looking around. "I'm sorry." She looked at him. "For what?" "It's not much." She smiled gently. "It has a roof. That's enough." Joe scratched the back of his head awkwardly. "I'll sleep in the sitting room." "You'll take the bedroom." "No," Eliana replied immediately. "I can't take your room. You need somewhere comfortable." "So do you." The two of them argued for almost 5 minutes. Eventually, Joe spread a mattress on the sitting room floor. "I've already decided," she sighed. "I'll never win an argument with you, will I?" He smiled. "I don't think so." For the first time in many days, a small laugh escaped Eliana's lips. It disappeared almost as quickly as it came. But Joe noticed it, and for some reason, seeing her smile made him happy. The following morning, Joe left for work before sunrise. Before leaving, he placed a small amount of money on the dining table. Beside it was a handwritten note. "Please buy food if you need anything. I'll be back this evening." "Joe!" Eliana stared at the note. She looked at the money. Then she quietly folded the note and kept it inside her bag. She never spent the money. Instead, she cleaned the apartment from top to bottom. She washed the clothes Joe had forgotten to wash. She arranged the kitchen. She swept every corner. By evening, the apartment looked completely different. When Joe returned from work, he stopped at the entrance. For a moment, he wondered if he had entered the wrong apartment. Everything was neat. Everything smelled fresh. Eliana walked out of the kitchen. "You're back." Joe looked around. "You did all this." She nodded. "I was feeling useless, so I wanted to help." Joe smiled. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to." He looked at her for a few seconds. Then he quietly said, "Thank you." Days slowly turned into weeks. Life wasn't easy. Joe's salary barely covered the rent. Sometimes they ate only twice a day, sometimes once. Whenever Joe noticed there wasn't enough food, he would pretend he had already eaten at work. "I'm not hungry." "You should eat." Eliana looked at him suspiciously. "You've been saying that a lot lately." "I mean it." But she knew he was lying. One evening, she quietly divided her food into 2 plates. Joe frowned. "Why did you do that?" "Because we're eating together. You need it more." "So do you." He wanted to argue. Instead, he picked up a spoon. Neither of them spoke during dinner. Yet it was one of the happiest meals either of them had shared in years. A month later, Eliana started looking for work. She submitted applications everywhere. Companies, shops, offices, schools, anywhere that might need an employee. Days passed. No one called. Weeks passed. Still nothing. Each rejection slowly broke her confidence. One afternoon, she returned home carrying another rejection letter. Joe was already home. "Any luck?" She forced a smile. "They said they'll call." Joe immediately knew she was lying. He walked over. Without saying a word, he took the letter from her hand. She looked away. "I'm trying, Joe." "I know. I'm really trying." "I know." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "I had everything, and now I can't even get a simple job." Joe gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Don't measure your worth by your circumstances." She looked at him. "You are still the same Eliana. The world around you changed. You didn't." She broke down crying. Without thinking, Joe pulled her into a gentle hug. At first she froze. Then she slowly wrapped her arms around him. Neither of them realized it, but something had quietly changed between them. That hug lasted only a few seconds. Yet neither of them would ever forget it. Life continued. One evening, Joe returned home carrying a small loaf of bread. "I brought something." Eliana laughed. "You look happier than someone who won a lottery." "I almost did." He raised the loaf proudly. "The bakery owner gave me a discount." She laughed again. A real laugh this time. Joe couldn't help smiling too. He realized something. Hearing her laugh had become one of his favorite sounds. A few weeks later, as they were eating dinner, Eliana suddenly stopped. She pressed her hand gently against her side. Joe noticed immediately. "What's wrong?" She smiled. "It's nothing." "Are you sure?" "I think I'm just tired." A few moments later, she continued eating as if nothing had happened. Joe watched her quietly. He wasn't convinced. But since she insisted she was fine, he let it go. Neither of them knew that what seemed like an ordinary pain would quietly become the greatest battle of Eliana's life. At first, the pain came once in a while. Some days, she felt perfectly fine. Other days, she would suddenly stop whatever she was doing and press a hand against her side. Whenever Joe noticed, he would ask, "Should we go to the hospital?" She always smiled, "It will pass." And somehow it always did. So both of them convinced themselves it wasn't serious. Life had already become difficult enough. Neither of them wanted another problem to worry about. One evening, Joe returned home carrying 2 plastic bags. Eliana looked at him in surprise. "What happened?" He smiled proudly. "I got another job." Her eyes widened. "You did?" He nodded. "It pays a little better." Without thinking, she hugged him tightly. "I'm so happy for you." Joe smiled. "So am I." He looked around the apartment. "Maybe now we won't have to worry so much." That night, for the first time since she lost everything, they ate until they were both full. It wasn't an expensive meal, just simple food, but somehow it tasted better than every meal Eliana had eaten inside her father's mansion. Not because of the food, because she wasn't eating alone. Months passed. The apartment slowly began feeling like home. Joe would leave for work every morning. Eliana continued searching for jobs. Whenever she wasn't outside, she took care of the apartment. Sometimes she would prepare dinner before Joe returned. Sometimes the two of them would sit outside the building after eating. Neither of them spoke much. They simply watched people pass by. Oddly enough, the silence never felt awkward. It felt peaceful. One evening, rain began falling heavily. Electricity went out across the neighborhood. The apartment became dark. Joe found an old candle. He lit it and placed it on the table. The small flame filled the room with a warm glow. Eliana smiled. "This reminds me of when I was little. My father used to tell me stories whenever there was no electricity." Joe looked at her. "What kind of stories?" She laughed softly. "I don't even remember. I only remember laughing." Her smile slowly faded. "I miss him." Joe remained quiet. Then he spoke. "I know." She looked at him. "No, you don't. I lost the only family I had." Joe lowered his head. "So did I." She frowned. "You never told me." "There wasn't much to tell. I lost my parents years ago. I've been alone ever since." Silence filled the room again. For the first time, they truly understood each other. Not because one had more pain than the other, but because both knew what loneliness felt like. As the weeks passed, the pain inside Eliana's body became more frequent. Sometimes she woke up exhausted. Sometimes she felt dizzy. Sometimes she quietly excused herself during dinner. Joe became increasingly worried. "We're going to the hospital tomorrow." She shook her head. "We can't afford it. We'll find a way." She smiled weakly. "You already do too much for me. I don't want to become another burden." Joe looked directly into her eyes. "You have never been a burden. Not once." She looked away. "You say that now." "I mean it." A few days later, Joe arrived home earlier than usual. He looked nervous. Eliana noticed immediately. "What happened?" He sat down across from her. For almost a full minute, he said nothing. Finally, he took a deep breath. "There's something I've been wanting to tell you." She waited patiently. "When you first came here, I only wanted to help." She smiled. "I know. But somewhere along the way," he laughed awkwardly, "I stopped seeing you as my late boss's daughter. I started seeing you as the woman I wanted to come home to every day." Eliana froze. Joe continued, "I don't have a mansion. I don't own a company. I don't even have much money. But if you're willing, I'd like us to spend the rest of our lives together. No expensive ring. No grand speech. Just honest words from an honest man." Tears slowly filled Eliana's eyes. She wasn't crying because she was surprised. She was crying because, for the first time since losing her father, someone had chosen her. Not because of her family. Not because of wealth. Not because of status. Simply because she was Eliana. She reached across the small table and held Joe's hand. "I'd like that." Joe smiled. "So is that a yes?" She laughed through her tears. "Yes, it is." Joe closed his eyes for a moment. He had never imagined that one simple answer could make him this happy. The following Sunday, the two of them quietly visited a small church. After speaking with the pastor, they decided they would have a very simple wedding. No luxury, no large crowd, no expensive decorations, only a few people who genuinely cared about them. As they walked home that afternoon, Eliana suddenly slowed down. She pressed a hand against her side again. This time the pain was stronger than before. Joe immediately supported her. "We're going to the hospital." She nodded weakly. For the first time, she didn't argue. Deep inside, she was beginning to fear that something was terribly wrong. The next morning, Joe borrowed money from a friend and took Eliana to a hospital. After several examinations, the doctor asked both of them to sit down. His expression alone made Joe's heart sink. "The illness has been developing for quite some time." Joe swallowed. "Can she be treated?" The doctor nodded. "Yes, but treatment needs to begin immediately." He mentioned the estimated cost. Joe's face turned pale. It was more money than he could earn in several years. Outside the hospital, neither of them spoke. Joe stared at the ground. "There has to be another way." Eliana gently held his hand. "We'll figure something out." From that day onward, life became a battle. Joe worked longer hours, sometimes 2 jobs in one day. He barely slept. He sold the few valuable things he owned. His old television, his small refrigerator, even the wristwatch his late father had left him. It still wasn't enough. Eliana noticed what he was doing. One evening, she quietly asked, "Did you sell your watch?" Joe smiled. "I never really liked wearing watches." She knew he was lying. Tears rolled down her face. "You shouldn't destroy your life because of me." Joe shook his head. "My life became better because of you." Weeks passed. Some days, Eliana felt a little stronger. Other days, she couldn't even get out of bed. Even then, she never complained. She always apologized. "I'm sorry. I'm becoming difficult." Joe would always answer the same way. "You have nothing to apologize for." One afternoon, as Joe was preparing dinner, Eliana called softly, "Joe." He walked into the room. She smiled weakly. "When everything happened, I thought my life had ended." He sat beside her. "But then you opened your door for me. You gave me a home. You gave me peace." She looked into his eyes. "If I had to live my life all over again, I would still choose to meet you." Joe couldn't hold back his tears. He gently wiped hers away. "Don't talk like you're saying goodbye." She smiled. "I'm not. I'm just telling you the truth." A few days later, their wedding day finally arrived. It wasn't the kind of wedding people post on television. There were no luxury cars, no famous musicians, no hundreds of guests, just a small church, a simple white gown, a modest suit, a caring pastor, and a few people who truly wished them well. When the pastor asked, "Do you take her to be your wife?" Joe smiled without hesitation. "I do." Then he turned toward Eliana. She looked tired. Her face had become thinner over the past few weeks. Yet she smiled the same beautiful smile Joe had fallen in love with. "I do." The pastor smiled. "I now pronounce you husband and wife." The small church erupted into gentle applause. Joe and Eliana hugged each other. For a brief moment, it felt as though every hardship they had endured had finally led to happiness. Just as everyone began preparing to leave, the church doors opened. Several men and women dressed in formal suits walked inside. At the front was an elderly lawyer carrying a large briefcase. Everyone turned to look at them. The lawyer spoke calmly. "Which one of you is Joseph?" Joe looked confused. "I am." The lawyer smiled. "Congratulations. I believe you got married today." Joe nodded slowly. "Yes." The lawyer motioned to the people behind him. 2 men carefully carried in an enormous ceremonial check. The entire church fell silent. Joe stared at it. So did Eliana. The lawyer turned the check around. Across it were the words, $25 billion. Gasps filled the church. Joe looked completely confused. There must be a mistake. There isn't. The lawyer opened a sealed envelope. "Years before your father passed away," he said, looking at Eliana. He prepared one final instruction. He instructed us that the first man who legally married his daughter should receive this inheritance. Eliana couldn't believe what she was hearing. "My father." The lawyer nodded. "He trusted us to keep it secret. Not even you were to know." Silence. No one spoke. Joe slowly turned toward Eliana. She was sad and completely confused. The lawyer handed the check to Joe. "It now belongs to you." Joe looked at Eliana. We can pay for your treatment. We can go anywhere. We're going to be okay. Eliana tried to smile, then she suddenly lost her balance. Eliana! Joe caught her before she hit the floor. People rushed toward them. Someone called for an ambulance. Joe held her tightly. Stay with me, please. She slowly opened her eyes. Her breathing had become weak. She looked at Joe. Then she smiled one last time. You gave me the happiest days of my life. Joe shook his head desperately. No, don't say that. We still have forever. She gently squeezed his hand. Then she looked upward for a brief moment, almost as though she could see someone waiting for her. Softly, she whispered, Dad. A single tear rolled down her cheek. Her hand slowly slipped from Joe's. She never spoke again. The church became silent. The check worth $25 billion still stood at the altar. But at that moment, it was the most meaningless object in the room. Joe would have traded every single dollar just to hear Eliana call his name one more time. And that is where today's story ends. But some stories never truly end. They only wait for the next chapter. I'm Patience, and I'll see you in the next story.